Hi, and welcome to today's Engaging for Missouri webinar. I'm Alice Roach from the Division of Applied Social Sciences at the University of Missouri, and I'll be your host today. With each of these 30-minute webinars, we intend to share research-based insights that leaders like you can apply in your own work to benefit and strengthen the state's agriculture and food system, hospitality sector, and communities. Today, Bruce Fowler will present about farm financial benchmarking in Missouri. Before I invite him to begin, I want to share a few housekeeping items. First, we'll close today's webinar with a question and answer session. Those of you who connected today via your computer may submit your questions in the chat screen. To open the chat, just click the chat icon that you see at the bottom of your Zoom window. If you joined today by phone, then you may email me your questions at roacham@missouri.edu. Second, all attendees are muted and may not start their video. Third, if you encounter any technical problems during the webinar today, then please let me know by either submitting a comment in the chat screen, or you can also send me an email at roacham@missouri.edu, and I'll do my best to help you troubleshoot. And last, we'll make a recording of today's presentation available. You can look for an email from Zoom that shares more about where you can access that recording sometime tomorrow. You can also find an archive of all of our previous Engaging for Missouri webinars on our Division of Applied Social Sciences YouTube channel. So with that, we'll transition to the topic of today's webinar, which is titled Farm Financial Benchmarking in Missouri. Presenting is Bruce Fowler, who is a Farm Business Management Analysis Specialist in our Division of Applied Social Sciences. So thank you, Bruce, for presenting today. If you could please unmute your microphone and start your video, then we can begin today's presentation.
Well, good morning, Alice. It's a pleasure to be here and to visit a little bit about farm financial benchmarking in Missouri and the work that we do in the FBMA office and through the FBMA program here in Missouri. A little bit about FBMA at the University of Missouri. That's me, and I am located in Gentry Hall is where my office is. With the pandemic, I haven't actually been there very much. I've been working quite a bit from home with the pandemic, just like a lot of other folks we know. And in FBMA work, the folks who do most of the heavy lifting and the work with teachers or the work with farmers are these teachers. This is a list of teachers that are at FBMA programs around the state. As you look at the list, you can see we're kind of spread out. We don't have any programs down in Southeast Missouri, not much of a presence in Southwest, several in Northeast, and a little work going in Northwest and Central Missouri. And as we look at the FBMA program, the role of those Missouri FBMA instructors, I kind of did this list in kind of how it works. And the very first thing they do is they start to work with a farmer or a farm family in establishing a farm accounting system. In Missouri, primarily that is either Quicken or PC Mars. Every once in a while, folks will try some others, maybe a QuickBooks or an Easy Farm, but by and large, it's Quicken and PC Mars. And the instructor then will work with the farmer to help them learn to accurately enter that data, the income and expenses into that accounting system. They will work with the farmer to help them to manage your income tax obligations. And notice I didn't say avoid paying income tax. It's to try and maximize that after-tax income. They will work with them then to develop a balance sheet. Many farmers that aren't a part of our program, when they come in, don't have any experience really in doing balance sheets. We work with them to understand all about the balance sheet and develop that cost and market value balance sheet. And then the next step that they do is work with the farmer in doing the whole farm analysis using FinPack. Then to work with the farmer developing strategies for tracking that enterprise data. And then once we get a feel for what the enterprise data is, they'll do a whole farm analysis along with enterprise analysis, again using FinPack. Then we start moving into understanding that information, working with the farmer so they understand what is going on with their farm financially. And notice that I put there the farmer makes more informed decisions. The teacher doesn't make those decisions. They help that farmer understand what is going on so the farmer can make better decisions. And then they assist that farmer in doing benchmarking activities so they can compare their farm financially with similar farms, as well as look at those long-term trends when their farm financial records benchmarks. Now, a couple of programs that we use in doing this work, you've already heard me talk about FinPack. FinPack is kind of the industry standard for financial analysis, and that is what the instructors use for the balance sheets and the financial analysis. Teachers will submit that farm data to the FBMA office in the form of a FinPack file. And then the other program that does a lot of the work for us here in my office is Rankum. Rankum is used to check the data for accuracy, and then we produce a Missouri FBMA summary using Rankum, and we submit that Rankum data file to the FBMB national database. And it's important to point out here that FinPack and Rankum are both products of the Center for Farm Financial Management at the University of Minnesota. And we work very closely, teachers and I all work very closely with the folks there at the center in doing the analysis and the benchmarking work. Some of the tools that our FBMA instructors use in working with farmers, first of all, producer notebooks. Each farmer that submits data for the summary gets a notebook, and in that notebook is the Missouri summary and their farm analysis. The benchmarking materials that we have in there are the farm financial scorecard, otherwise called the stoplight scorecard, as well as the benchmarking worksheet. That stoplight scorecard uses Farm Financial Standards Council information to help the farmer. They see where they're at on that particular piece of financial information, and it's either a red, a yellow, or a green, with red indicating that there's possibly a problem, yellow that they need to kind of watch that, and green meaning they're good to go. Teachers use that some. And then the benchmarking worksheet, teachers will sit down with farmers and identify strengths and weaknesses in their farm finances and areas to work on. Teachers also go to the FinBin, and we're going to talk about the FinBin again here in just a little bit, and that is the FBMB national database, where they can look for similar farms data to use with that farmer for benchmarking. And then also the plan on a page is a fairly new thing. 2019 summary is the first year we use that with our farmers here in Missouri. The plan on a page we developed as part of our USDA NIFA benchmarking grant. Right now, the Center for Farm Financial Management is looking at incorporating this into future versions of FinPack and My FinBin. But that plan on a page is just a one-page document with some key financial information. A sample plan on a page is here on the screen, and notice it's got data from the income statement, the balance sheet, some financial guidelines measures. And what this sample has is 3 years and an average. What we anticipate moving towards for teachers to use with farmers is a document maybe that would look a little bit more like this, where you would have a couple years of data, maybe 3, and then a benchmark, and then look at projections for the next year. And this would be an area that the teacher and the farmer could sit down together and look at where we're at. Notice down here in the lower part, we've got some goals, and then looking at some dollars available for debt service. So that's kind of what makes up that plan on a page. And again, that's just another one of the benchmarking tools, benchmarking aids that teachers have available. And this is something that through this NIFA grant, we're working with our partners in some other states to try and get this fine-tuned to make it work for each state. A little bit about our summary. Our summary is located at the website that's on this slide. Excuse me. Some of the information from the 2019 summary. If you see here, there's a slide about the corn cost per acre. If you look at our 2019 corn cost per acre, it looks like compared to 18, the seed, fertilizer, and chemicals didn't change much. The land rent went up just a little bit. Those other expenses went up quite a bit. Couple more slides from our 2019 summary. Soybean costs are pretty similar to corn costs in that land rent really didn't change any from 18 to 19. The seed, chemical, and fertilizer looks like farmers were trying to save a little money there, but then they spent a little more on those other expenses. Another graph that we have that I pulled out of the summary is the net farm income by type. In our summary, we rank them will identify farms by type and then show what their average net farm income is. The average for all farms in our 19 summary was $59,311. Crop farms did a little better than average in 19 in that they averaged $86,717. If you keep going there on the slide, you see that the crop in the beef farms, the beef farms are next. They did actually quite a bit less than the average of 27,913. And the crop and beef farm actually did worse than either the crop farm or the beef farm at 22,467. Then you'll notice that other is everything that isn't a crop farm or a beef farm or a crop and beef farm. And that includes quite a few things. You notice we don't have dairy or poultry or hog farms separated out. So anything that didn't fit into a crop farm or a beef farm or a crop and beef farm, they had to have 70% of their income from that set of enterprises to qualify by that type. Now, the other piece of data that I went ahead and included from the summary, last year's summary, that I thought was significant, and you hear about a little bit, is how the amount the average Missouri FBMA farm received in government payments in 19. The average Missouri FBMA farm received $52,839 in government payments in 2019. That's $22,000 more than they got in 18, and almost triple, actually a little more than triple what they got in 17. Excuse me. And I guess as I look at that, my curiosity is what will it look like in 20? We'll know that here in a few months as we start getting some Missouri data in for 2020. This is just some examples of some of the data that was in the Missouri 2019 summary. It is important to again reiterate that Missouri FBMA does contribute data to the FBMB National Database, and we are the only farm management organization in Missouri that contributes data to the database. Those participating farmers again do receive a producer notebook, and that database is publicly available. Anybody can access that at finbin.umn.edu. And I think it's important to again say the confidentiality of participants in that database is protected. The folks up at the center work very, very hard to make sure there is no individually identifiable information available. And they do that by way of you can't get a report with less than, I believe, 10 farms. You can't generate a report. And their thought is if there's at least 10 farms in that report, you can't pick anybody out. So confidentiality is ensured. An example of the information, a report you can get from the database. What I did here was just a financial summary for 15 through 19. And I also, when I was setting up this query, I indicated that I wanted only farms that were in each of the reports. They were in every report to show up in this. So that way you get some consistency here and you can kind of see some trends of what's going on with the farms. Quick look at this slide shows a couple of things. First thing it shows is how awful 2015 was for Missouri farmers. And you also see then that the average of this set of farms, their average in 16 was 56,000, and then you get past that and 40 to 50,000 kind of catches it. Again, this is just a financial summary report that we can generate out of the database. This is a soybeans on cash rent report. And again, I set the report up so it would only use farms that were in all 5 of these years. Bottom line I look at here kind of tells the story of what's going on. Net return per acre in 15, we lost money on every acre. But after that, you look, in 2019 was a pretty tough year. Now the thing, I snipped this, so the report does continue on. The line right below this is the government payments. And I admit this slide's awfully busy, but if I had snipped it to include a little more, it would have been even harder to read. The government payments in 19 were pretty significant. So this slide doesn't tell the whole story on it, but not including government payments, looks like average Missouri soybean cash rent farm, about $30 an acre is what they did for 19. So a little more about our benchmarking efforts here in Missouri. We do participate in the USDA NIFA Farm Business Management and Benchmarking Competitive Grants Program. Missouri FBMA has received awards in 19 and in 20. We have been the lead institution in both of those grant applications, partnering with our friends at the Illinois Farm Business Management Association, at the Central Lakes College in Minnesota, at the Southwest Minnesota Farm Business Management Association, with North Carolina A&T State University and Fox Valley Technical College in Wisconsin. Between those two grants, we have gotten pretty close to $1 million coming into these organizations to help with benchmarking activities and try to increase the number of farms we're contributing. And that's been a real positive for all of our programs. And again, the plan on the page thing we did develop through this. So, Alice, I think I've probably talked long enough. Do we have any questions?
If you do have questions for Bruce, go ahead and please submit them in the chat, or you can also send me an email at am@missouri.edu. Bruce, thanks so much for that introduction. I have a few questions to get us started. And the first of those is, what makes a Missouri producer eligible to participate in the benchmarking program?
You know, the biggest part of it is you kind of, at this stage of the game, you kind of need to live in one of these communities where we have a teacher. The teachers, the school districts, the teachers in those school districts work with farmers in their communities. In the past, we've had a few more programs around in some other parts of the state. I've looked at some of our FBMA history, and we used to have a lot more programs. It is important to point out probably that adult education is supported by the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education. They don't pay all the expenses, but they do pay some of it. So the school district isn't out there all on their own. But the biggest part of it is a farmer needs to have an interest in it, and the school needs to have a program, and the farmer needs to be willing to share their information with the teacher. They need to trust that teacher, that they'll show some confidentiality with them as they work with them.
Great. So who tend to be the best candidates? Beginning farmers, farmers who have some experience, those that are looking to transition to the next generation, or a mix of those characteristics?
Probably the biggest thing is just an interest in learning more about their farm financial situation and where they're going. It might be good to point out that before I came to the university and to this position, I did teach in a high school in Missouri and work with farmers in this position. And, through the years, the farmers that were the best participants were the ones that wanted to learn more. I had one or two that were told by the banker they needed to come see me, and those folks generally, as soon as the banker left them alone, they left me alone. So.
Sure. We have one question here. When is the annual Missouri summary typically published every year?
Typically, we try to get it out the end of April, the 1st of May. In 2019, the FBMA program was not any different than anybody else in the world, and that COVID impacted that. Teachers had more challenges getting with their farmers to get data entered and working with them and getting the records done. In 2019, it was probably July before we got that all put together. I'm hoping for April.
Excellent. And it's available online, where?
At the FBMA website.
Okay.
And I have absolutely drawn a blank on what that is. adultaged.missouri.edu.
Excellent. So on average, how many years in a row do producers tend to participate in the program? I mean, it looks like some have a multi-year commitment.
They participate as long as they want to. The folks that I had when I was teaching high school, generally once they started, and if they liked it enough to stay with it 2 or 3 years, they generally stayed with it. It's interesting too, in that since I've come into this position, we've had some teachers that have retired, and it's been interesting to visit with them, and that they've retired, and there's folks that they've had for 20 and 30 years that, by and large, they transition to that next instructor and stay with the program. The thing of it is, Alice, the information they get from this, once they get used to getting that information and having that assistance of the teacher and being able to get this, they generally don't want to give it up.
Sure. And from the producer's perspective, is there a fee associated with participating?
That's something that really varies by the school. There's some of our schools that charge a little bit of a fee. Some of them, the school district, the Board of Education doesn't want the teacher to charge a fee. It just kind of varies by the school and the situation.
Okay, great. If you wouldn't mind skipping back to the slide that had the net farm income data for 2019, we saw some significant variation, like you mentioned, like crop farms and those other farms tended to be are seeing much higher levels of net farm income. Is that at all attributed to farm size, or is it just the fundamentals of what they're producing tended to be more profitable? What's kind of going on here in this chart?
Boy, that's a good question, and that's one, Alice, I'd really kind of need to dig into the data a little bit to look at. It may well be farm size may have attributed some of that. It's possible.
Okay, thanks. In your benchmarking analysis, do farms only compare themselves to other farms throughout the state, or are more localized data available so they can compare themselves to other farms in their county or in their region?
You can, when you go to the FinBin, you can specify counties. You can also specify farm size. In going to the FinBin and looking for that data, you can really get the data set narrowed down to a very similar farm. In Missouri, we had 109 farms as part of this year's data set. We typically have 115 to 130 in our data set. If your major consideration is you want a specific farm size or some other pretty specific characteristics, you can, on the FinBin, look at including some farms from some other states as well. You can look at Minnesota. Minnesota is a big part of the data in the database. You could also add possibly some Nebraska. 19 will have some farms from Illinois in it as well. So you can really narrow that search down and find farms that are very similar.
Excellent. So for farms that haven't participated in the benchmarking program, maybe because they don't have an adult ed program nearby that they can take advantage of, how can they still make use of the FinBin data that are published on a national scale, and then also the Missouri reports that are available?
Well, and the challenge there is, do they know their own financial data? And if they do, then it's pretty simple. They can go to the FinBin and look for similar farms. If they have maybe some ideas about where they're at, there's some helps there on the FinBin website to try and look at your information some. If they don't have anybody in their community to help them to understand that, that does make it a little bit of a challenge. But I think the bigger thing for folks to know is that this benchmarking data is there. The comparison is there. The challenge is for them to figure out what their own data is.
Sure. And I believe the national site does allow you to compute your own financial ratios and then compare them to benchmarks. Is that correct?
They've got a help there that will kind of guide you through that. I haven't ever sat down with it to see just how accurate a number you come up with there.
Okay, great. So for farms that do want to go try out using those benchmark reports that are available on a national scale, and they find that they're below the 50th percentile whenever they're computing their own numbers and then doing that comparison, what are some practices that they might consider using to improve their financial performance?
Well, I encourage folks when they look at benchmarks, don't just look for weaknesses, look for strengths. And then those areas that you see that you're weak at, maybe look at some ways that you can improve that. And I know that's kind of vague, but the important thing to remember is every farm's different. Every farm has strengths and weaknesses and things to look at. And when you find something that's a challenge, I mean, look at it and just think about what your options are to try and improve that particular area.
Good points. We have time for one more question, and it's referring to the debt to asset ratio. I know that that's one ratio that you take a look at in your benchmarking reports. Do you have any sense of how farms with high debt to asset ratios tend to perform financially relative to those that rely less on debt?
You know, I've looked at the data set the past few years in trying to see, is debt a real drag on farms or not? And there's just not a lot of correlation there. There's some farms in Missouri that are doing very well, and some of them do have debt. There are some farms that are not doing particularly well, and it's just kind of the situation they're in. Not that huge amounts of debt are great for a farm, but they don't. It's it's not always an indication of how that farm is performing.
Excellent. Well, thank you for sharing that insight and for presenting today and answering our questions. And thank you to our audience too. When you exit Zoom, you'll see a post-webinar survey will load in your browser. If you could please consider responding, we'll use the results to improve the webinar experience and also brainstorm future topics. Again, you should receive a recorded copy of today's webinar via your email within about a day from now. And we'll also include a link to the slides so you can refer to those again. Our Engaging for Missouri webinar series will resume in the new year. On Wednesday, January 13th, Mallory Ray and Alan Spell will present Taking Farm and Forest to the Glass, the Economic Contribution of Missouri's Distilling Industry. Again, thank you for joining us and hope you have a great Wednesday and a very happy holiday season. Thanks again, Bruce.
Thank you, Alice. Appreciate it.
Yes.